Okay, here we are again, assessment time with Garnet. We've done a general introduction, we've spent some time discussing the no assessment, and we also spent a little bit longer talking about the subjective assessment, the one I think you're going to use the most. Okay, 4 kinds: no assessment, subjective assessment. Now let's talk about this one. This is the Q&A, the question and answer assessment. And the truth is that number 2, the subjective assessment that we did in the previous video, and number 3, the question and answer assessment, the Q&A assessment, they very easily overlap and enforce each other. So the Q&A is not necessarily a purely question and answer. It can blend with number 2, the subjective assessment. I think it's pretty easy to understand, where you may ask a person some questions, simple questions usually, that will help you clarify your subjective assessment. Usually what will happen, especially once you get more skill by practice and risk, meaning you try, once you spend more time doing the subjective assessment, what you'll see is, of the 4 categories, you're going to be pretty confident quickly in probably 2, if not 3 of them. Just like, okay, yes and yes, but then maybe you just have a little hesitation or insecurity or a little lack of clarity in 1 or 2 of the others. So if you use the Q&A assessment, my recommendation is go as far as you can with the subjective and supplement with the Q&A so that it's time efficient. Use it as a clarifier, as an assistant to the number 2, to the subjective assessment. So, what could you ask about the coordination? Well, you can ask straight out, how coordinated do you feel you are? Do you ever stumble? What's it like to try to learn a new dance step? You could ask things that you think are not so abstract. They kind of reflect into the person's life. One thing that I like is to have a tennis ball around. Give them a tennis ball and say, could you toss it up and down with your right hand? Toss, catch. Now do it with your left hand. Oh, that's not as easy. How about toss right to left, left to right? Just watch and see what it's like. And also gives you some insight, because if you give them a little task, what you're going to see is more or less easily, you're going to see whether they have a secondary emotional response to that. Do they immediately get anxious, or do they say, well, this should be fun, and they get kind of delighted? Do they exhibit fear? Do they seem a little irritated that you want them to do it? You get some insight into the conditioned emotional response. Interesting. So, flexibility. You can ask them straight up, what's it like? Are you able to, if you went on your TV with remote control, could you go channel to channel and feel like you're still being able to follow the different, whether it's the news to a sports event to, a drama or a movie? See what it's like for them to be able to move in and out of different perspectives. Endurance, to me, one of the ones I like to use is, what's it like for you to read? If you settle down to read, can you read for an hour or 2 if you want? Or do you find yourself nodding out, kind of blurring out after 10 minutes? So the Q&A is where you ask certain simple questions that are going to be augmenting the subjective assessment that you've already made in good part. So even though I categorize them separately as number 2, the subjective assessment, number 3 as the Q&A, the question and answer assessment, in practicality, these 2, I think, go together really very, very nicely. Okay, so the Q&A, a little easier to understand. Have fun with the questions, maybe give them a task. It's a way of you getting more information that you feel perhaps you need to add from your subjective assessment. Thanks.